Anybody thought about something over the last hour or so, or you tried to clear your mind about things? Anybody got a... Yeah, go on, yeah.
What is the Connaught reference in the...
Connaught, place, the province of Connaught,
yeah, no,
west,
well, why is it referred to as...
which is where Croagh Patrick is in the province of Connaught. Yeah. But also the west of Ireland is it's still a mystical place, like the west of Scotland or the Hebrides or somewhere like that. It's still where the Gaelic, where Irish is spoken, and as indeed Gaelic is spoken in Scotland. Yeah.
So it's sort of representative of that.
Yes. But also the pilgrimage up Croagh Patrick still takes place, and so thousands of people go up. I can't remember what day they go up. It's in the summertime, and a number of people still go up barefoot.
Can I just ask, you made a reference, I can't remember what it was, to a poem which was published in English, which was repressed.
Yes.
And one which was published,
which
was far more overt in Gaelic. And I wondered if there was a sort of, whatever you would call it, sort of subterranean sort of Gaelic thing which sort of was subversive.
All of the old Irish texts were published in academic editions all the way through from the late 19th century through to the 20th century. None of them were censored by the government's censorship, and all of them came through. And the Midnight Court is the one I'm referring to. The Irish writer Frank O'Connor translated it into English, and it still wasn't bound. So there's a kind of allowances would be made for something, which is supposedly a classic of the 18th century hidden Ireland, because that would be pushing that hidden Ireland back underground again. And again, that's part of the irony that Clark was talking about, that the famous Gaelic poet who lost his books, well, they're all bound again now. So even though he didn't have a copy of Tom Jones, for instance.
I was just going to ask about the reputation of W.B. Yeats in Ulster for the Protestants. Is he not liked by the Protestants, or they just treat him as a classic author, and how does that work?
That's a really good point. I mean, from what I know, Yeats was always on the A level, for instance, and there was always Irish literature on the A level, and still is Irish literature on the A level, Catholic or Protestant, regardless of what school you were at, I think, or whatever school was choosing to do that. On the other hand, Yeats was his Easter 1916, his great poem about the Easter Rising, was concerned with memorializing those who were, I'm going to say martyr, is that the right word? It's a word that the poem is about and thinks about. And it also thinks about it also has the famous line, "Too long a sacrifice will make a stone of the heart." When I was growing up in Northern Ireland in the 1970s, that was a line that was quoted at length, as it would appear that the violence wasn't going to stop. There would just be a continuous reciprocal tit-for-tat killings going on all around the place. So people would reach out to Yeats, but they'd reach out to Yeats because of these memorable lines. And the other one is the memorable lines that the people reached out to whenever Donald Trump was elected and now re-elected. What rough beast, it's our come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. As if we're moving into a new epoch and a return to the kind of thing that he saw coming in the 1920s. And now we wonder, and we hope that it's not coming again, well I do anyway, hope that it's not coming again in the 2020s.
I ought to mention also, when I was in Ireland, I saw this large mural on a wall which looked like W.B. Yeats to me.
Yeah.
So I thought it was him, but it turned out to be a poet I'd never heard of, called Francis Ledwidge.
Oh, yes.
Who lived in Slane.
Yes.
And he died in the First World War.
He did, yes.
And I was quite surprised, I'd never heard of him. I thought his poetry was quite good.
Ledwidge was a wonderful poet, and he did, a number of the Irish nationalists who had been so-called Irish volunteers set up against the Irish Volunteer Force was set up against the Ulster Volunteer Force in 1912. A lot of them joined up, and partly they said they joined up was to support Belgium because Belgium had been invaded by Germany at the time. So Ledwidge signed up and joined joined the British Army, and Ledwidge has a beautiful poem on the death of Thomas MacDonagh, about the death of his blackbirds, and a kind of a version out of the Irish. But then Ledwidge himself died in the Dardanelles, I think.
I don't think he's well known in England, is he?
No, but he's a wonderful poet. And there's recently been a really nice edition of Ledwidge produced. Yeah, But there's all those other people. There's another guy called Thomas Kettle, who was a friend of Joyce's at university. He again he joined the British Army. And as soon as he got there, he realised it was not in any way a war of liberation, as a number of them did. Yeah. And he also was killed. Yeah. But one of the things I often say about Yeats, about the Easter Rising, and I always say to students, is that 500 people died in the Easter Rising, in Easter week in Dublin, in April 1916. In May, something like 25,000 Irish people died at the Somme, on the first day of the Somme. So these two events are right beside each other, and the sense that the British had of some great betrayal, which is partly what led to the fact that there was the immediate summary execution in martial courts, and summary execution of the leaders, 16 of them killed. Yeah. So complicated positions. Okay. All right. Just to focus if any more questions? Sorry, any more questions? Okay. Just to focus your mind a second. I want to go back into two things. One, I mentioned Brian Coffey, and I didn't get time to give a little quote from Brian Coffey. This is the third piece of prose on the first page. And this is Coffey in his old age being interviewed by an American critic, and he's asked the question about whether he is a Catholic poet, and he thinks about what it is to be a religious poet, and this is his answer. I'm very conscious, he says, it's no use of obtruding the dry bones of Catholicism into a poem. That's not working. It's no good writing mystical poetry when one hasn't had a mystical experience. And I kind of think there's something to do with some people of religious belief that very few people have had a mystical experience. They certainly have a set of religious practices and beliefs and adoptions, but have you had a mystical experience? You know, even if it was at a marble top for 20 minutes. I think that W.H. Auden's mystical experience was at a garden party, I think, which is what reconverted him back to the church, to the English church. But he says, if one is like Moses, this is your mystical experience, encountering the voice in the burning bush, there won't be any question of dogma coming into any statements Moses makes about that, you see. If Moses is there, and if the voice of God is speaking, I am that I am, speaking out of the burning bush, that's not a mystical experience. You're not going to argue back against God as he's delivering the Ten Commandments, because your mystical experience will trump every other consideration, if you have it, or if you have had it. Therefore, he says, his issue is about being a religious poet, again goes back to this question of you're asking questions. When one is a religious poet, one is in the position of someone who's answering questions about themselves as well as they can. And an answer to a question, and the answer has to be all that they can possibly say as far as they know it. And that's the religious answer. Again, it's dialogue, back and forward. Unless you're Moses, delivering the Ten Commandments. But not very many people are in that position. And the second thing I'm going to read is this little quote, the first half of this little thing here from Jacques Maritain, the French philosopher who I think I told you about. And Maritain was massively important for I'm going to have to say this, it's kind of technical, but this kind of neo-Christian movements of the 1920s, 1930s. And what I'm talking about are the converted poets like T.S. Eliot and W.H. Auden, but specifically T.S. Eliot. Maritain had been Coffey's PhD supervisor in Sorbonne in the 1920s. But Maritain says in a bunch of essays collected on the subject of art, by showing us where moral truth and the genuine supernatural are situated, religion saves poetry from the absurdity of believing itself destined to transform ethics and life, saves it from overweening arrogance. Right? Now, you could see how attractive that would be to somebody like T.S. Eliot, and you could see how attractive it would be if he was going to give an account, for instance, say, of W.B. Yeats, who thought, well, I can solve all of these religious and spiritual problems for myself entirely in my own terms, regarding to whatever belief system I happen to grab on any given day. Right? And you see that Maritain says that religion actually saves you from that because it holds back the secular, and it holds back the temptation of the human to find the answer for themselves. And you can see that's part of the challenge of, I know I've been talking about kind of the rough beast and all of that kind of stuff, but also the rough beast for Eliot and for Yeats and people like this, that's also the liberalism of the age which is taking over, and that move into kind of individuality, and then up into the 1960s and 1970s, a kind of, I suppose, freeing of the conscience from everything that previously people would have thought. So that's what, bearing those two things in mind, I wanted to bring you into these two contemporary or recent poets. Seamus Heaney died about 10 years ago, but Lena Cullinan is still with us. But to think about these two contemporary poets, and both of them going back and taking on again something which we would think is the vocabulary, the practice, the thinking which we associate with spirit or spirituality, but in their own way they are also secular. And as Heaney says, this is kind of happening after the whole collapse of the whole Christian thing or whatever it is. But there's still something going on there, which are ways of thinking about the world. The world is kind of revealing itself as a kind of a numinousness, and that numinousness, the revelation of the exaltation, but the revelation of the exaltation in Heaney, in these poems that we're looking at, is, on the one hand, it is in the natural world, and a lot of environmental and what we would call eco-poetical writing is also thinking about how the natural world reveals something about itself. But still, Heaney hangs on to this, what I talked about very, very briefly in Austin Clarke towards the end there, this mode of parable. And that parable is a crucial kind of a notion. To go back to Tennyson, Tennyson said, later in his life, I hate to be tied down to say this means that. Right? But he did say that his poems had a certain parabolic drift. You want to sit down with a bunch of students and try to work out what the Lady of Shalott means? I'm telling you, that's a task. Right? There is still mystery going on in something like in that poem about this woman in the tower and the Sir Lancelot and all of these other things that are going on here to do with what the Lady of Shalott means. But if you see that it's parabolic, it cannot be tied down to this means that. The whole question of meaning in a literary text becomes something which is up for discussion and up for debate. Although I think I kind of know what it's about. It's a poem about art and about life, and you do not prioritize art over life. And this is kind of what's going on here. The little quotation I have from Heaney at the beginning is kind of about that, where he's talking about the importance of the poet's mission. And his example, the strongest example you could get in terms of 20th century European poetry is this example of Osip Mandelstam, imprisoned by Stalin. That's a strong example that you could have. And the notion is that it's holding out for some kind of independence of thinking and independence of thought. And the thing that he has to go to is he has to go back into a kind of an ideas about spirituality and faith in order to back that up. Okay, so let me just read a couple poems here. I should have seen you think about this. The word that we're looking for in the second and the third poems is marvel or marvelous. Okay. I've got to get a better copy of this. This one, printed it over the end. Okay, it's in the second of the famous one about the shipping forecast, but I'll get to there in a minute. But I want to start off first of all with this first of these poems, these Glanmore sonnets. The Glanmore sonnets is a sequence of sonnets that were written in Glanmore in County Wicklow. What Seamus Heaney had done was he had left Northern Ireland. He had been, I think, working and lecturing in Belfast. Okay, he had been, as the rising young star of British poetry and British and American poetry, he'd been in America and Berkeley, California. He'd met all the kind of hippie poets and was kind of influenced by what they were doing in terms of their approach to the natural world. But he had been working in Belfast and then left it to take up a job in Dublin and to live with his family in a rented cottage in the Wicklow Hills in this place called Glanmore. Now, in a kind of way, what these poems are, there's a poem called Exposure, which is about this, it's the story either of Ovid in exile, or indeed of Dante in exile, of the conscientious poet being cast out of his own society because he's either criticising them or he can find no place within it. Now, going back to Northern Ireland, it's still the case with people I know and knew in Northern Ireland. This comes also from Michael Longley, who was a wonderful man, a wonderful poet, and he died a few weeks ago. But for Michael and his wife Edna Longley, and Edna Longley has a wonderful, Michael's wife Edna has a wonderful essay about all of these poets leaving. This amazing Belfast Renaissance of poets, and then they all left. Part of the reason why they left was for work. Paul Muldoon, for instance, is a professor in Princeton. Heaney ended up as a professor in Harvard, and indeed here in Oxford as well too. So the people went to be, you're not going to do that well. Poems don't sell very many copies, unless you're Seamus Heaney, I suppose. So all poets, like many novelists as well, have to have a second job, or indeed a real job. But Heaney took this moment of exile, and also the moment of not only of exile, but also of going to live in nature in a rural place. Reminiscent of the rural place from which he had come, but even further away from what it was that he had come from. Okay? And this case was Glamorgan's whole sequence of sonnets, all about his experience in this place, and this is the first one. And this is if you, as I read it, if you think about the movement of the line of poetry, it goes like a plough, and then it comes back again, and then the next line comes back again, like that, okay, in furrows, okay, and this is what you've got to imagine as you listen to it. Vowels ploughed into other. You get it? You get it? Yeah, okay, all right. Vowels ploughed into other, opened ground, the mildest February for 20 years, is mistbands over furrows, a deep no sound, vulnerable to distant gargling tractors. Our road is steaming, the turned up acres breathe, now the good life could beat across a field, and art a paradigm of earth new from the lathe of ploughs. My lee is deeply tilled. Old plough socks gorge the subsoil of each scent, and I am quickened with a redolence of farmland as a dark, unblown rose. Wait then! Breasting the mist in sowers' aprons, my ghosts come striding into their spring stations. The dream grain whirls like freakish Easter snows. Okay, so it's a springtime poem. It's a ploughing poem, and inevitably by the final line it has to bring in the Easter, which has got to be involved in it because it's the renewal of the earth, and the renewal indeed of the earth after the season of Lent, in which I am suffering, because I've given up crisps and sweets. It's very difficult, but you do know, of course, and I'm sure Anthony will back me up on this one, Sundays are not in Lent.
And also Saints' Days.
And Saints' Day. And, you mean I've got St. Patrick's Day as well? Yeah. But surely practically every day is a Saints' Day.
Yeah. They are.
Yeah. Oh dear, I remember whenever I was at Cambridge, the chaplain in the college I was at in Cambridge used to go out drink for Lent except for Sundays, and he was staggering around. But this is the dream grain whirls like freakish Easter snows. There's a mystery here. And the mystery is the mystery of nature. But the mystery of nature inevitably has to go back into the idea of a religious kind of observance and seasons. And those seasons are not just, they're seasons of observance as well as seasons of nature, and both of them are brought together. But the mystical idea of vowels ploughing into other, that the fact of writing itself is a natural process, and that what the vowels do is that then they create this movement through experience and through life in this way. And then also, this is it's a physical thing. This is about ploughing and earth, but at the same time we hear it in the sound of the music. The air is important as well. Vowels ploughed into our opened ground. Miles February for 20 years, mist bands over furrows, a deep no sound. And then this word breathe. Our road is steaming, the turned up acres breathe. And that word breathe echoes on into lathe, the lathe of ploughs. And in the middle of it, we've got this heresy. Art, a paradigm of earth, new from the lathe. And the heresy is that art is enough. Because it is a paradigm, or as I say, a parable, or something like this, which provides for you a pattern of what new art, new life would look like, because the poem, when written, will always be new. All sonnets have 14 lines. This one rhymes as many, many sonnets do, slightly irregular in the second in the 6 lines of the sestet, but it's more or less the form that was established by Petrarch in Italy in the 14th to the 15th century, whenever Petrarch was there, and then picked up by Shakespeare, who is inevitably haunting all of these things as well too. And it's a form which exists to this day. Poets still write sonnets, but it's still new. Now, for Maritain, the heresy is thinking that the poet would be arrogant enough to think they were also a creator. Okay. Now let me leave that one there, okay? All right. Then we want to object furiously at this point. Okay, just leave that idea hanging. Go forward 6 or 7 poems in the sequence, and you get the famous one, which is the listening to the BBC weather forecast. The shipping forecast, sorry, that's what it is. Do you know the BBC shipping forecast, have you heard? Where are you from?
Yes.
Where?
I'm from Prague.
Prague.
We don't have shipping forecast.
Well, you don't have any ships. You need to get some sea. Had you heard the BBC shipping forecast before you came to England? No.
We know it now.
I'm sorry for picking on you, but I have a Taiwanese student at the minute, and she's fantastic with all these questions. Actually, she's brilliant. She speaks better English than most of the English students, anyway. But they've got lots of sea in Taiwan. Yeah, I asked her once, where does the sun go down in Taiwan? And of course, it goes down in the west. Anyway, oh God, the silly questions. Sorry to embarrass you. Okay, here we go. Dogger, Rockall, Malin, Irish Sea, green swift upsurges, North Atlantic flux, conjured by that strong gale-warning voice, collapse into a sibilant penumbra. Midnight and close down, sirens of the tundra, of Eel Road, Seal Road, Keel Road, Whale Road, raise their wind-compounded keen behind the bays and drive the trawlers to the lee of Wicklow. L'Etoile, the Guillemot, La Belle Hélène nursed their bright names this morning in the bay that toiled like mortar. It was marvellous and actual. I said out loud, a haven. The word deepening, clearing like the sky elsewhere on Minch's, Cromarty, Faroe. Right? Do you know this poem? It's wonderful. Do you know it? Is this the first time you've heard this poem? Really? Oh God, it's famous. Oh, sorry, it's wonderful. Well, I'm glad I've introduced it to you. Right?
It's taken huge liberties with the shipping forecast.
Ah! Go on.
But it's Doggerfish, a German bank.
Yeah.
Oh, dear, you see. Terrible. No, okay, I'm going to... He's allowed to do it. It's called poetic license. So the poetic license which is being used here, but one of the things that's going on here is the din shanicus. Right? And I used this word previously in the first, an hour or two ago. The din shanicus, that's an Irish word, and it's to do with the lore of place, and it's related to the naming of places. So that the naming of places and the lore of the places that are named, they contain within themselves the history of the place. So the tale is also what is contained within what looks like a set of geographical locations. But the geographical locations had their names given to them by people in many, many different languages. Better linguist than me would wonder where Dogger, what language Dogger is. Rockall, there's a disputed land if ever there was one. Is that British or Irish at the minute? Do you know? Rockall? Do you remember? It's British still, is it? Yeah. Oh God. You know what? Sorry. Rockall is it's a rock in the middle of the Irish Sea, under which apparently there are vast reserves of oil. But now that we don't drill, baby, drill. What? Sorry.
Don't touch on.
I know. He's going to colonise that. You know, first Greenland, then Rockall. But Malin, that's Irish. Malin Head. That's the northernmost point of Ireland. Irish Sea. Is Irish an Irish word or an English word? Irish Sea is also, and I correct me if I'm wrong here, but the Minch is also the Irish Sea, isn't it? Yes, Ben, yes. The sea between Antrim and Scotland is the Minch, yes. Louis MacNeice, who I will mention in a minute because of the parable thing, Louis MacNeice has a great book called Crossing the Minch, and it's about a tour up through the Hebrides, yes. So the Minch is, what kind of word is Minch? Is that a Scots word? Cromarty? Scottish or Irish? That's Scotland, isn't it? You're the expert. And finally, after Rockall, the Faroes? Is that Danish? Danish, yes. Yes. So what are these? These are all the words of the languages of these islands and beyond. Not just the British islands, although you're not allowed to call it that anymore. It's the Hiberno-British Archipelago. But anyway, but it's not just the Hiberno-British Archipelago, the Hebrides or the Faroes or Rockall, but it's also Denmark. And it's also, of course, the English Channel, or is it Lamont? Is it Lamont? There's a dispute over a word, if ever there was one. Yes. And God knows how many disputes there are between Czech and German places in the Czech Republic, I should say. Yes. How many disputes? Is Franz Kafka a German or a Czech writer?
He's a Prague writer.
He's a Prague. That was a good answer. I just so much have to do with Dublin and Prague being the same place. Kafka and Joyce, you know, and all. Anyway, that's another class. Okay. Yeah. So what's going on? And then, of course, there are these French. The names of the boats are all French. Fishing boats in the middle of it are all French. So it's a linguistic thing, and again, it's to do with language. It's to do with the naming of places. It's to do with the lore that comes and the history that is embedded within the names of the places. And that is marvellous. And that's where the marvel comes from. So the marvel, which is your mystical moment, if that's what it is, which comes out of the poem, the marvel that comes out of the poem, the numinousness that comes out of the poem, that is the marvellousness of seeing what these places are like. And there's a really crucial word that Heaney uses next after marvellous. It's marvellous and actual. Because that brings it back into this notion of actuality, what exactly actuality is. That's a big word in Yeats, and every now and again he uses the word actual. When he says actual, he means the real thing. And there's a poem called The Real Thing coming up. Right, okay. Now, the question, the heresy then, in Christian terms, or even in generally religious terms, the heresy then, is it enough to find the natural world actual, or in terms of the naming of places, how humans have named the natural world? So something going on with this kind of sense of an engagement with what the marvellous might be, and bringing it back into some kind of secular place, and also bringing it back into the realm of art. Because the sound of the words themselves, and how it is he's putting them together in this sonnet, is itself trying to create this sense both of marvellousness and actuality. Okay? Now, leave that one there. Anybody got anything else you want to say about that? It's beautiful. I've really not read that before. Oh, I'm delighted that you...
Could you
yes,
just
go on,
say
sorry,
something
yeah.
about the toiled like mortar? It's a very striking
It
line.
is. I think, I was reading that, I was thinking, oh, that's an interesting one. That doesn't look like sea, that looks like mortar. Is it the colour of the sea? Does the sea look like the road, or does it look like concrete? Is it something to do with the sea at a certain time of year? This is the Irish Sea in Wicklow Bay. Does that make sense?
It may do. For me, it was more like something that held things together in the way that cement and concrete holds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I was reading that, I was like, oh God, what's this? Because this looks like earthbound. It doesn't look seabound. Because what we've got is the Atlantic Ocean. It's all these islands in this island and other islands in the Atlantic Ocean. And then you've got the more of the boats being held there. I guess the fishing boats are escaped from the weather. And that's why all the French boats are all tethered in the Irish harbour. I guess. I'm going to have to mention Brexit now, but are you allowed to have French boats? I live in York, and all of the lobster in Bridlington still goes abroad. None of it comes to us. Anyway, that's different. Is that it? Yeah. Okay. So, and then more marvels. And this one's slightly shorter because this is a little parable. This is a later poem from 1991. Big sequence of poems called Squarings. All these little poems called Squarings. It looks a bit funny on your text because Ben, thankfully, has got it onto a single page. I'm sorry, the copy I sent through ran it over the single page, but they're little square boxes of stanzas. That's why they're called Squarings, right? But in the little square boxes, you've got this different mode, this kind of, I'm going to say mystical mode. It's not really a mystical mode, but it's a parabolic mode, okay? But this tells an Irish story of the monks of Clonmacnoise. And Clonmacnoise is right in the middle of Ireland on the River Shannon. So if you travel up the Shannon still, you can still see the remains of the beautiful monastery of Clonmacnoise. The annals say, when the monks of Clonmacnoise were all at prayers inside the oratory, a ship appeared above them in the air. The anchor dragged along behind so deep, it hooked itself into the altar rails. And then as the big hull rocked to a standstill, a crewman shinned and grappled down the rope and struggled to release it, but in vain. This man can't bear our life here and will drown, the abbot said, unless we help him. So they did. The freed ship sailed, and the man climbed back out of the marvellous as he had done. Right? So this mysterious little thing, which is a very beautiful little parable, mythological tale, but what goodness name does it mean? The person who comes down from the ship out of the sky comes down to earth, and that's marvellous. But we're all standing staring at this. That's marvellous for us too. So there's this extraordinary reciprocal thing going on about the discovery of new and weird and strange and interesting things. And all of this sitting here as something which in the hands of anybody else we would say was a religious experience. On both sides. Or a magical experience, if that's the same thing. I'm not entirely sure whether it's the same thing. Okay. Anybody got anything you want to say about that? Okay. Anyway, it's a beautiful little thing. Right. Did you know this one before? No. You did. Good. Yes. Good. Thank goodness for that. Okay. And I think I've just got time for one of these two Lynn Niculinan poems, The Brazen Serpent, which is, oh my goodness, The Brazen Serpent is a symbol of the medical art, is that right? Is that right? And in it, the Lord gave to Moses, or the Israelites, the brazen serpent appeared and cured their illnesses, but at the same time, it then became worshipped as a graven image. Is that? Am I right? Yes? So it's a very, very complex religious iconography of the brazen serpent. Yes?
And then later on, Jesus is compared to the serpent being lifted up for the healing of the nations.
Yes, yes. I've got a picture of the picture of the brazen serpent here on the back here, which is from Saint Denis in Paris. It's actually on the cover of Lynn Niculinan's book, the volume, The Brazen Serpent. But you can see that am I right, Anthony? Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm right about this brazen serpent, but also it's a prefiguring, a typological prefiguring of the cross. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Now, Elaine Niculinon is now a recently retired professor of Renaissance literature in Trinity College Dublin. She taught me 40 years ago. And Elaine's mother was Eilish Dillon, the novelist, who you may know. The Bitter Sea is a wonderful novel, her famous novel. And her father, and she herself also comes from an Irish Republican family, which are like Irish Republican, I'm not saying royalty, but the family were involved with Plunkett's. He was one of the executed leaders of the Irish Rising, and also from his, I think her grandmother was his niece, I think. So there's something going on here. And she's originally from Cork, although Dublin based. The thing with Elaine Niculinon is that her best poems work in this parabolic mode. They look as if they're, inverted commas, post-Christian, but they're still saturated in everything to do with the Christian tradition, specifically the Catholic tradition, in that she's absolutely obsessed with nuns, right? Who appear all the time, and not as they usually appear in contemporary literature these days, which are figures of Gothic figures of horror. Not like that at all, but also because of her extraordinarily learned woman, also as these traditions appear all the way across Europe, and that attaches me back to the strange student of Clark, because Clark's aware of the relationship between the Irish Church and in that case his poem, the Spanish Church, but also all of the places all across Europe from which the Irish both Christianized after the so-called Dark Ages at the end of the first millennium, but also the places to which the Irish went. I mean, I'm talking about Iona and Lindisfarne, but also the places to which the Irish went after they had to leave Ireland after the victory of the Reformation, the beginning of the 17th century, and then again at the end of the 17th century after the Battle of the Boyne and the Battle of Aughrim in 1690, but also the flight of the wild geese in 1604, and that's why in that 17th century, that's when the Irish College was set up in Salamanca, for instance. But what the persona that Niculinon has for herself is of a kind of an interested, educated tourist. And in this poem, The Real Thing, I think if you can imagine what's going on, slightly, as I say, it's slightly riddling and parabolic, but I read it as somebody who is visiting a religious site, and at the religious site she's being shown a relic of the brazen serpent. Now, if you've been in Milan, there is apparently, the brazen serpent is apparently in Sant'Ambroglio's in Milan. Anybody seen it? It's on a pillar, and there is a brazen serpent on top of the pillar. But of course, it could not possibly be whatever that 3,000 years old, or whatever it would have been, like a 500 BC or 1,000 years BC. So whatever it possibly could be. But anyway, there was a famous, they say it. Because the question about whether they say what it is because there's a debate over the real thing. And that's what the poem's about. Are we ready for this? Okay. It's a beautiful, slightly mysterious poem. I think I can't understand every bit of it, so if anybody's got any suggestions, please do. The Book of Exits, The Real Thing. The Book of Exits, miraculously copied here in this convent by an angel's hand, stands open on a lectern, grooved like the breast of a martyred deacon. The bishop has ordered the windows bricked up on this side, facing the fields beyond the city, lit by the glow from the cloister yard at noon on Palm Sunday. Sister Custos exposes her major relic, the longest known fragment of the brazen serpent. True stories wind and hang like this, shuddering loop, wreathed on a lapis lazuli frame. She says, this is the real thing. She veils it again and locks up. On the shelves behind her, the treasures are lined. The episcopal seal repeats every coil, stamped on all closures of each reliquary, where the labels read, bones of different saints, unknown. Her history is a blank sheet. Her vows a folded paper locked like a well. The torn end of the serpent tilts the lace edge of the veil. The real thing, the one foot kicking under the white sheet of history. Now, I think we've all seen these relics, and they're all the real thing. And I don't know many hot nails of the true cross there are in practically every city in Europe or whatever. Yes, I'm sorry, I don't want to be too skeptical about this, right? But there's something that's going on here to do with faith and belief and desire. Is ours the desire to think it's the real thing, or is it the real thing? The way in which these things appear are fine, and the way they are given to us, to us by those who believe they are the real thing. But then what about the person who gave it to us, like the monks that are coming down, like the figure that comes out of the ship from the sky? Who are those people? Who are they? What are they? Who is Sister Custos? Who is this believing, credulous nun who's showing us these things? Because there is a question here about credulity, in other words, of belief. And if we say credulity, that means your false belief, I suppose, if that's what that word means. But there's a question here to do with belief and to do with the object and the need to believe in the object in order for the object to represent the real thing. And the real thing is, of course, the truth of the biblical story, the evidences that come back down from history, from the biblical story, because history for us is important. That's a material thing. It's recorded in records, it's recorded in objects, and it's recorded in poems, which come into being when they're thinking about what those things were. But when you go to either the person who's working in the convent, showing you their relic, or looking at the relic itself, which is, of course, like most allegories, behind the veil. And truth happens behind the veil. The curtain is, in the Catholic Church, the curtain is drawn across in front of the real presence in the tabernacle. And then it's shown from behind the veil, and then it goes back into the veil again. So you've got a whole process of how we tell stories about religion and how we tell stories about life. But also you've got the person who's showing the thing, who's involved in telling the story, and she is the real thing, the one foot kicking under the white sheet of history. I must say, I've cheated and tried to find out what this poem's about. And somebody says the white sheet is the tabula rasa. And the tabula rasa is the white soul, or the white self at birth, on which nothing is written. And what we do is we write our experience on the tabula rasa. The metaphor comes from John Locke and his essay concerning human understanding. But the idea that there is a tabula rasa and we write our experience on that history is something written on a white sheet, right? But also ourselves and our own personal histories is something that's written on that as well too. So it's both about the larger question of religious faith and belief, and it's also about another question about the person who is believing. And then the third person is this poet, this person who walks in and is telling you about her time in visiting as a tourist. In the poem Across the Way, just briefly, there are some very unsettling things in this other poem, Vierge Ouvrante. The Vierge Ouvrante is you've probably seen them, there's a statue of the Virgin, and then you open it and then there's a crucifix inside. The example I've given here, I think it's the British Museum, a very old one from the British Museum, but you open up inside. But it's, on the one hand, it's Mary, and on the inside there's the suffering is in the centre of it. It's about contemporary and modern suffering as well. But there's also the tourist there. Mercifully, in the last room, cameras are not allowed. You have to do your best with glass and shadows, and the light shining along the passages of your skull to capture her, to remember. The opening Virgin, her petticoat shell like the poplars of an avenue, and then it goes on to describe the relic, or the statue, or what it is, the work of religious art that's showing itself to you. Now, those 4 or 5 poems that I've given you, don't appear to be written by some people who have religious belief, but they are people who inevitably have to be drawn to the question of what it is to have that belief and how it is that you have to believe either in the objects of the world as they represent the history of the human, or the history of spirituality, which is also there as well too, or in the present world, the contemporary world, what it is to face a field being ploughed, what it is to shelter from the weather, today's shipping forecast as opposed to yesterday's. Everything moving along just in a completely contingent, everyday, normal, ordinary, quotidian way, where yesterday will probably end up the same as today, and tomorrow might end up the same as today. But that something's going to happen along these points of time. So what are these kind of insignificant moments of doing into them? Wordsworth calls these moments spots of time. They're in a space and in a time. When you go back to that space, you'll remember it again. Other people call it the privileged moment. James Joyce is being immensely blasphemous when he calls such moments epiphanies. But we have all of these moments of seeing, and we inevitably reach towards this kind of sense of the ecstatic and the visionary. So whether it's a question of belief or not, it's inevitable that we have to think in these terms. And that's enough. Okay, all right, so a bit more free. Yeah, go on.
Just sort of moments of awe and wonder.
Yes, yes, the marvellous.
Yes,
yes, or the newness, or yes, the reveal. Something marvellous has been revealed to you, and what that would be. And in the most, it's like, oh, what a beautiful morning. Yes, that it could be that. In Joyce, it could be something like, oh, I never noticed that clock before. Oh, it's a clock, right? But the things in the world show them, and also the things in the world, they show themselves with their name and their word attached to them. So this is the literary art, and that's what it does. Okay, the sculptor of the Vierge Ouvrante, or the person who wrote the annal of the tale of the monk coming down, or the monks and the creature coming out from heaven. These are all objects by which we understand the world and our position in it. And the fact of what we're doing really is we're telling stories.
Isn't it almost impossible in Ireland not to come across holy wells, Irish crosses, saints, obscure saints, and their remains? You're bound to stumble over them, but land is saturated with the Celtic past.
Yes.
And did they read, do you think, any of those lyrics of the Celtic hermits of the 8th and 9th century? Did any of these Irish poets
well, these Irish poets did, yes. Definitely. Certainly, I mean, Heaney and who could read but not speak Irish. Lynn Cullinan speaks very good Irish. Clark was translated Irish. Yeats read lots of mythology, although quite frequently he wrote the mythology as well. Making up your own mythology is a good thing. Yeats was obsessed with the holy wells. Are amazing. The Yeats plays that are set by holy wells are extraordinary as well too. But there's a place in Sligo. I used to be involved with the Yeats Summer School for a number of years, and there's a place in Sligo just on the way, just outside Sligo town, where Yeats came from. And just there is a holy well just on the way out to Lochgill, which is an amazing place. But the holy well is still festooned with mementos and ribbons and rosary beads, and it's not gone away. I mean, and that's an ancient folkloric practice, which was still persisting in the 19th century, but that's not to say it's not persisting now.
Then it was forbidden, and then it was recovered.
Yes. It was forbidden, but people still did it anyway. I mean, the other thing is the Mass Rocks, which still exist. You can still go and visit the Mass Rocks, because they could not having churches. The masses were celebrated out on the mountainside, and the Mass Rocks still exist, and they're still revered as holy places. They're also political places as well too, because it's the persistence of the old belief, isn't it? Yeah.
Sorry, there was a word you used to describe it.
Dinshanicus. D-I-N-N S-E-A-N-C-H-A-S. That'll do. I might be wrong. Dinshanicus. The lore of place, or the mythology of place, or involved with the naming of places. Seamus Heaney has loads and loads of poems just named after a place. Tomb, for instance, and that's his word, town there from where he comes from. And he just puts the word in his mouth, he goes, tomb, tomb, and he's talking about what the vowels sound like as well too. Yeah. Yeah. And they in the town, which is the Irish epic of Cuchulainn and Maeve, which was actually collected by the monks and written down by the monks in the 10th or 12th century or whatever it was. The version that we have, which is a kind of a flawed version as these things were. But most of it is battles happening at certain places, exceedingly violent, more violent than Homer's Iliad, right? And these battles where Cuchulainn kills somebody, and then the place gets named after the person who was killed.
Nice.
So it's as if the entire country, the ancient names of the whole country, are to do with the place. The final battle where the death of Cuchulainn occurs, which between Ferdia and Cuchulainn, that town still exists and it's called RD after Ferdia. And RD is there just in County Louth, just north of Dublin. You can go to RD and it's still named after the battle in the town, 1,000 years previously. So the name still exists there. But then again, I live in York, yeah, Eboracon, Latin, which the Vikings called Jorvik, which then the English called York, and so you've got the entire history of the place is recorded in the names. I don't know about Oxford. Is there a ford?
Yes.
Is there an ox?
Yes.
A river. There you go. That's easy, that one, isn't it? That's easy. Yeah.
That way,
Yeah.
there's the Ox Pound.
Yes. 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 So you see, there you go. Every place has that, and then it just becomes translated and translated and translated and translated through all the various linguistic things. And he's absolutely massive. I mean, his poems about Viking Dublin are fantastic about the memory of the Viking experience of Dublin, which is before the Normans arrived, when things got really bad. So I always say to the students, why didn't you English all give in to the Normans? Because we didn't. So there you go. Sorry, is that okay? Any more questions? No? Good.
Thank you so much. I think I'm right in saying that Tolkien often wrote from names of people, names of places, and he found the name and he thought, what is the law behind that? And also the thing about poets being creators, Tolkien went for the sub-creators. So under the creator with a capital C, they were sub-creators, and that was okay.
Yeah, okay. That's the way out of it. Yeah.
That's the way out of it, yes.
You said you forgive us. You forgive me anyway.
It may not be so heretical.
Oh, not even so heretical. Yeah.
What a day it has been. I have learned so much, and you've opened up a whole world of Irish literature, and of course including these wonderful poets. A little something from OCSG will be winging its way, but here is a tiny card from us to say thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you so much those at home who have been joining us, or those who are watching it whenever you are watching it. Ben, could you remind us what we're doing next? I mean, not this afternoon, but OCSG.
Yes, we've got Tim Kendall talking about, what's Tim Kendall talking about?
Tim Kendall is going to be talking about something very interesting.
Tim Kendall comes from Exeter, and he's, apart from everything else, he's a naturalist, and so is his wife, and they're very great naturalists.
Right.
But he's talking about
The problem of goodness.
the problem, yes, the problem of goodness.
The problem of goodness.
The problem of goodness. Oh yes, this is based on William Golding. And yes,
He's wonderful, Tim. Really excellent. I strongly recommended.
Yeah.
And also a great critic of Irish poetry as well too.
Tim came to us a long time ago and talked to us about the war poets. So he's very well read. But yes, we're looking forward to that. William Golding and the Problem of Goodness. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ben. Can I also say that the support group for OCSG, I've been thinking a little bit about what we like to do and when we like to do it and why we like to do it. And looking forward to 2026. If anybody has any thoughts, ideas, suggestions, we'd be delighted to hear those.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, everybody, for coming today. One last thing, if I may, if anybody's happy just to help put the chairs round the side of the room when we go, because we've got an AA group meeting later, and that's how they like the chairs. That would be much appreciated. Another round of applause, please, for Matt. And thank you all very, very much. Have a blessed day.